Hey there, it's Matt from Dice Camera Action, mashup podcast about board games and movies. And today I wanted to come on and give you my first impressions of Arcs. So Arcs is the newest game from Leader Games, designed by Cole Worley, and it's a game that I have been very excited for the last, I want to say, 6 months or so. I didn't back the Kickstarter, but I did pre-order it. It just came in, and tonight I have a few friends coming over. We're going to play it for the first time, and then I'll come back and give you my first impressions. Before we get into all that, I wanted to give you my quick thoughts on where I'm coming from with Leader Games, with Cole Worley, and with area control kind of war games. So generally speaking, I'm not a huge war game guy. I do like the occasional area control war game. Some of my favorite games are Dune War for Arrakis. I'm also a huge fan of Star Wars Rebellion. But the reason I'm a huge fan of those specific games is because they're two-player games. I really like a good two-player war game. If it works at two, count me in. When you get to the multiplayer war game area control, that's when there's problems that start to seep in for my preference. Generally speaking, growing up, when I've played Risk and kind of graduated into the more modern board games and area control games, I found there was still always the problem of at least one person getting cornered, trying to turtle because they ended up with a bad starting position, bad dice rolls, one person that gets targeted because they're just the easy target and that kind of thing. And one person always leaves the table feeling really bad and not having had a great time. And just my personality, I want to make sure everybody at the table is having a great time, win or lose. So the reason Arcs seem to kind of bypass that issue with me is that it doesn't seem to be a game where, yes, there's area control and you're going to want to hold on to specific areas. But even if you lose an area, it seems to me that you can start building in another area fairly easily. And really the goal of this game is not to just like build and expand and, build and build until you kind of climax in this big war. Really what it seems to me is a situation where you're setting yourself up. You're trying to set up a situation where you can kind of go in for a big point boon, maybe at the end of each chapter. It's less so a game where you're just like building and expanding and building and expanding, and it's all about war. It seems to be a lot more Euro elements in this game that has obviously some war and battle and area control involved. More than anything, this seems like a game about timing, and that's what really interested me and why I was able to, bypass the war game, area control, multiplayer, not really my jam. The other thing that really intrigued me about this is the trick taking. I'm a huge trick taking fan. I grew up playing euchre and I grew up playing other trick taking games. It's something that I play with my family. I played a ton of euchre even in high school and college and that kind of thing. So I love me a really interesting trick taker, and obviously that being the engine of this game kind of drew me in as well. The last thing that I thought was really intriguing about this game was that there's, I think, 5 resources in the game, and there are only 6 cardboard pieces of each type of resource, I believe. So it's very finite, very closed economy, and you're constantly jockeying for getting the resources you need at the right time. And all that being said, the reason that interests me, I love a game that is very tight and very difficult to get things done, where it feels like a constant grind. And although the tension is always high in those games, it's just so much more satisfying when you can kind of clutch and grab and fight your way towards something that you need, and you finally get it, and you do get that big moment where you're like, oh, okay, I'm cashing in now and I'm going to make this thing happen. I find that very satisfying, and those are the types of games that I really love. I will say this is going to be my first Leader Games play. I have not played Root. for some of the reasons that I mentioned before, but primarily because when I did my research on Root, though it did seem like a game that might interest me, from what I understood, you needed to play like 4, 5, 6, 7 games and really get your head wrapped around each faction to really get to the crux of what makes Root great. And I just, again, not being a primarily an area control war game guy, I just don't have the game group that would be able to get that many games done in a shorter period of time in order to really wrap my head around all the factions and be able to do the game justice. I haven't played Oath either. It just didn't seem like my jam, especially the fact that it is primarily like a campaign, like long stretched out kind of campaign game. Typically is not my jam. I've not actually dived into a legacy game. It's not something that interests me that much. At some point I probably will, but Oath just seemed like this long drawn out legacy game, campaign game that just didn't really fit my preferences. So this will be my first leader games and actually my first Cold War game too. So take all of that into consideration when I come back and give you my first thoughts. Hopefully I'll give you kind of a unique perspective. If you're primarily a Eurogame player, but you like to dip your toe into the area control side of things, maybe my opinion will make a lot of sense for you. So yeah, I'm going to dive into ARX. This is probably my most anticipated game of the year. I'm very excited. We haven't quite decided yet if we're going to use the Leaders in Lore expansion, if we're just going to play kind of the straight base game, or if we're going to start with the asymmetric. A lot of people are saying don't. It's there's enough to chew on in your first game that you don't need the asymmetric starts. But I'll talk to the guys before we start and we'll make a decision. But I'm leaning towards just playing the base game. And yeah, we'll give you first impressions shortly. Okay, I'm back. I played my first game of ARX and I really enjoyed my first game. I feel like I just barely scratched the surface. There seems to be so much strategy and things to keep track of and little details in the game that, didn't come into play this time, or I just ignored because I was just trying to focus on specific things. So it feels like there's a lot more to discover here with this game, but I had a really good time. And I did come in with kind of the idea and the understanding that the game is really tight and often difficult to get things done. And so I kind of prefaced that with my friends that came over and played as well. And, I said right off the bat, this is the game where you're making lemonade.
When life hands you lemons.
Make lemonade?
No.
Every hand is a lemon, and when life gives you lemons, you got to make lemonade. So I did really enjoy that puzzle of trying to figure out the hand and how to play it out. The art and graphic design has really grown on me. At first, I liked the art, but it didn't really stand out to me as being excellent. But as I'm looking through the cards and getting the feel for the game, the art has really grown on me, and I'm actually really, really digging it now. And I gotta say, I actually love the artwork now that I've dug into the game and felt the feeling of playing the game. The rules were a lot simpler and more straightforward than I thought. I will say that we did play without the Leaders in Lore expansion. So maybe bringing in these asymmetric powers brings in a lot more details of like, oh, this happens first or this is a reaction, or little details of how things play off of each other. Maybe that complicates things quite a bit more. But in my first game with just the base game, I felt that it was very straightforward, pretty streamlined. The mechanics are very intuitive. The player aid that comes with the game is 2 pages, or like a 1 bifold little book basically with 4 total pages, I think, and works really well. A quick reference for a lot of things, was able to answer a ton of our questions, so I think they did a really good job with that. And the one thing I wanted to say too off the top, it doesn't really feel like the word trick taking gets used a lot to describe this game, and technically yes, I guess it is trick taking, but it didn't really feel like trick taking. It felt like you're playing cards for actions, and there's specific ways in which you do that. The only part of it that did feel like trick taking is going for the lead, or going for initiative, as they call it in the game. Sometimes there's a thing you really need to do, and to be able to do that, you need to play first. And so you have to try to play in such a way that you're going to gain that lead at some point in the round so that you can do that thing and play first. Other than manipulating the game in that way to get the lead or initiative when you need it, not much else about this hand management and playing the cards felt like trick taking. That's not a negative. I'm not like slighting the game by saying that. I'm just saying that like the word trick taking I think is used fairly loosely here. In terms of gameplay, like as I said earlier, making lemonade out of your hand for me was what made the game so fun and interesting.
First, you roll out a multimedia campaign to convince people lemons are incredibly scarce, which only works if you stockpile lemons, control the supply, then a media blitz. Lemons are the only way to say I love you, the must-have accessory for engagements or anniversaries. Roses are out, lemons are in.
Every time you got a hand of cards, it felt like a dumpster fire. You're like, what am I going to do with this? And being able to like squeeze the juice from that lemon.
Limited edition lemon bracelets, yellow diamonds called lemon drops. You get Apple to call their new operating system OS Lemon.
And figure out how you're going to play your hand in what order, and was really, really satisfying. Yeah, so there was this one hand where I had a ton of like really low cards. Wasn't sure what I was going to do with it based on the way that things played out. I didn't really have an opportunity to seize the initiative in a way that made sense. And then with my very last card, I saw an opportunity.
Get a hashtag campaign. Something isn't cool or tight or awesome. No, it's lemon. Did you see that movie? Did you go to that concert? It was effing lemon. Billie Eilish, OMG, hashtag lemon.
And I think that's one of the major cruxes of this game, is like seeking out those opportunities to kind of jump in and make a big splash. And I was able to do that. I started this hand with like what I felt was a dumpster fire. I wasn't going to be able to get much done. And in that very last card play, by using a prelude action and moving a bunch of ships into a territory that I think was not expected by anybody else, I was able to raid a territory and actually get a huge boon out of it. So that felt really, really good. And it really puts the like that, making lemonade out of lemons kind of analogy really kind of stood out for me.
Sit back, rake in the millions, and then when you're done and you've sold your lempire for a few $1 billion, then and only then you make some f***ing lemonade.
And, over the course of the game, I'm talking with my friends. We're like, okay, yeah, it feels like it's really tough to get things done. And maybe there's too much luck, because if you get a really bad hand, what can you do? And then like that occurred. And I said, like, guys, it really seems like you just got to like stay the course, be very, very, you've got to be able to pivot and change your strategy and be very tactical and very flexible from round to round, from card to card. Because otherwise, if you try to do too much of a long-term strategy, it's not a game that necessarily allows you to do that, because there's just so much happening, in the short term, and so much you have to react to. And again, primarily because of how difficult it is to manage your hand of cards and play it in such a way that's going to like milk it as much as possible. So yeah, in that one hand, I was able to make a big splash with a hand of cards that seemed like it was trash. And that felt really satisfying. And that one moment in that game feels like what I want to come back to this game for over and over again. Another thing I wanted to mention, it didn't feel like in my first play like a war game or an area control game. There's a little bit of that. I want to say I rolled dice 3 times in that game. So not very often. It was just like I was trying to set things up, trying to score some points. And there was a few opportunities where I'm like, oh, I see an opportunity to jump in there and do a raid, or jump in there and take out some ships to score a certain endgame ambition, right? But otherwise, like, it wasn't a situation where we're going back and forth and attacking here and attacking there. It seemed like everybody was being very careful about setting things up, and when there was an opportunity, jump in there and attack or raid or whatever the case. So for that reason, I want to say it didn't feel like a traditional area control game, and I actually really like that because you can get those satisfying moments of jumping in and fighting and taking something, and there are those moments where you're on the other side of it, where somebody jumps onto your area and takes something from you, but I think that's part of the fun of this game. You got to just embrace it. And speaking about combat, I thought the battle in this game was really, really nice and short and streamlined and simple. The defender does nothing. The attacker has X amount of ships. They roll that many dice. They choose one of the 3 different types of dice that they can use for 3 different purposes or risk levels. They roll the dice. You get the results. That's it. All the decisions are happening from the attacker. So if they take any damage or deal any damage, they decide where it all goes. So it makes it so that every combat is like, 30 seconds to a minute or 2 at the most. That we've all played the area control game where there's like 2 people going through a big war and everybody else is just sitting watching, waiting for the results so that they can move on. So I really appreciated that. The streamlined combat mechanism in this game is like just perfect for a guy that doesn't absolutely love big combat style games. Overall, I really enjoyed my first play. It felt really tense. The rules were really straightforward. It felt like really clean gameplay. Every action felt so important that when you had to do something kind of minimal, it was really painful. But those were counterbalanced by the moments where you could do a huge thing with one card or one play or one pivot or whatever the case. So I really, really appreciated that as well. I just can't wait to get this to the table again. I think I'm going to start texting somebody and it's like, when's the next time we can sit down and play this game? I want to dig into it further. I really want to get the Leaders in Lore expansion on the table and try those asymmetric starts. And the draft at the beginning sounds like a lot of fun. So yeah, those are my primary and I guess first impressions on ARX. This is a mashup podcast about board games and movies. So I want to ask you, what movie would you pair with ARX if I was going to do a podcast and we were going to review ARX and pair it with a film? Let us know in the comments.